think DeMartini uses a really good sort of example of values comparisons. It's like there's a trade-off, but people just aren't aware of the trade-off that person's made. And again, like he uses a story where he talks about he was talking to a doctor, and this doctor was really, really miserable, really upset, hating life, and he's talking to him about what's going on for him, and he asks him, who are you comparing yourself to? And he says, no one. I'm not comparing myself to no one. He's like, no, have a good think about it. Have a good think about it. So he sits for a minute and he goes and starts to think. And he realizes, oh, well, maybe there's this other doctor. And he goes, well, tell me about him. And well, before we talk about him, tell me about, all the things that you value and the things that you think you're doing well in life. And he goes, I've got a great relationship with my partner. I've got a practice. Got a couple of cars. I've got a great relationship with my kids. Even my stepmother, I've got a great relationship with. I can travel a few times a year and, but I still feel miserable. And he goes, well, talk about the guy that you're comparing yourself with. He goes, well, he's got 4 cars and he's got 3 practices. Yeah. And he's really well acclaimed, very famous. And he lives up on the hill in a bigger house. And he goes, well, let's say that you were able to have those 3 cars, more practices, a bigger house, and more notoriety. If you got those things, but you had no good relationship with your wife and kids, you weren't able to travel as much, right? All the things would you trade with him? And he said, well, no. And he goes, well, where are you thriving within your values that maybe he's had to trade off with? He goes, well, he's split up from his wife and partner because he's too busy. He can't travel. His kids don't get to see him at all. And he's like, well, tell me now again, like, would you trade? But it's so easy to see on the front end, right? Like, what's going well with people. It's like, but there's always a trade-off. And it's like typically people that live within their values, they get what they want. The high values, they typically get what they want, but they've had to sacrifice. And that's the trouble when people compare what their actual real high values are to someone else's. It makes it feel like they've got very little.